But what's more astonishing is that the resistance has literally faced the greatest military powers in the world, ganged up on it in a tiny strip of land that they have completely carpet bombed, where they're committing an extermination campaign and a Holocaust. And the resistance is still popping up, even in places where they say Hamas has been eliminated and it's so, quote unquote, clean. In the north, the resistance regroups and faces off with them. I think Hamas at one point came out because Israel kept saying, well, they use human shields, etc. And Hamas came on their Telegram channel and said, leave the populated areas, come face us in these open areas where you have expelled, ethnically cleansed people. So they're not actually fighting Hamas. And we all know this. We all know they went into Gaza to do what they've been saying for 20 years they want to do. This is, it's a little bit shocking that this is such a surprise to people, because Israeli politicians, academics, and military personnel for the past 20 years have been talking about taking Gaza, cleaning Gaza, and particularly since the discovery of natural gas offshore Gaza's coast. And so they're doing what they've been wanting to do, which is to ethnically cleanse, to destroy Gaza, to take it. But they're failing. They're failing miserably. Their soldiers are being pummeled. The only thing Israel has succeeded in doing is killing children, killing civilians, and destroying homes, destroying the infrastructure of life for millions of people.
Hello everyone, I'm Rania Khalek and this is Dispatches. Israel has decimated Gaza, bombing homes, roads, buildings, bakeries, malls, shops, water installations, universities, hospitals, institutions, memories, dreams. In fact, it's turned hospitals into graveyards, killed 40,000, injured 80,000. And it's telling us it's not finished yet, as it continues to displace and starve 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, who are every day living out an apocalyptic Hunger Games nightmare. All of this terror is being inflicted on Gaza, we're told, because of the Palestinian prison break and military operation on October 7th, a day when Israel's image as a strong and secure settler colony that couldn't be messed with was punctured. The Israelis have tried to make up for that lost image by launching blood libels against their victims and a genocide with no end in sight. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Palestinian novelist, poet, activist, and author of many books, including Mornings in Jenin, Susan Abulhawa, who has recently spent time on the ground in Gaza, witnessing the destruction firsthand. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rania.
It's really wonderful to have you on, and you've been doing incredible work, both on the ground in Gaza, where you spent some time over the last few months, which we can talk about in a bit, but also you've been writing so many really important pieces for the Electronic Intifada, and I encourage people to go check those out. And I want to touch on a few of the themes in those pieces in our conversation today. And I think a good place to start is, I just want your general thoughts, because this is in the news right now and it speaks so much to the situation that we're witnessing, the double standards that we're witnessing, the sort of divided world that we're witnessing. And when I say divided world, I mean the small group of imperialist countries versus everybody else. And that's the fact that the ICC has said that they're going to potentially issue an arrest warrant for two Israeli officials, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. But it's interesting because they've also said they want to issue arrest warrants for even more Palestinian resistance leaders in Hamas. And so I just, before we get into all the other stuff, I just wanted your general thoughts on the fact that this actually happened, but also the double standards inside of it and what that means for the sort of institutions that we're supposed to rely on for justice.
So, I'm not a legal scholar, so I can't comment on, the innards of the legality. However, I do think that a lot of what we're seeing from these international institutions is political theater, and without a real intention of holding Israeli leaders accountable, or any Western leaders. It's like, I think Karim Khan admitted today in an interview that a senior leader, I assume in the Western world, told him that the ICC is for Africa and thugs like Putin, and that's a quote. And this is saying the quiet part out loud. We all know that. We've seen one Western war criminal after another, whether it's Tony Blair, Dick Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld. You name it. Do what they want, commit the war crime after war crime, and never be held accountable. Given the political climate and the way that the West is being sort of uncovered, and the fact that these international institutions have been set up to serve Western interests, something we've always known, but can now actually demonstrate in a material way. I think that they're feeling pressure to do something, quite frankly. And I think that's what this is. And the fact that they would, charge more Palestinian resistance leaders versus Israeli leaders is hugely telling. Not just because, one is an imperial power and one is an indigenous resistance force. So, and it's also, the hypocrisy of these institutions is being revealed through, the fact that they have charged a resistance force with the same crimes or worse than what the leaders of this imperial force are being charged with, especially because, and this is what I was thinking about before, there has really been no real investigation or accounting for what happened on October 7th. Everybody just talks about October 7th as if it's like, oh, do you condemn it? It's horrible. Hamas did this, Hamas did that. But the fact is that there's a lot that is just that we don't know, and that's really contradictory and conflicting. For example, initially they said 2,000, they downgraded it to 14,000. 1,400 dead, yeah. And then they said it was 1,200, and then it was 1,139, and then we found out that hundreds at least of those were killed by Israel, by Israeli forces themselves. So, and then, Karim Khan also lumped in charges of rape, which were thoroughly debunked. So it's not clear what evidence they were using against Hamas in the first place.
Just Israel's claims, which is so crazy. And, just to add a bit to what you said there, it's really interesting to me to equate the armed resistance of indigenous people, fighting for their liberation versus a colonizer. And it would be absurd if we were to go back in history and actually try or take a look at from a legal perspective. like what something like Nat Turner's Rebellion did, right? Like everybody wants to say they'd be on the side of the slaves in a slave revolt 200 years ago. But no, you're demonstrating to me that you absolutely would not be. There is no equating. Nobody wants violence. Like it would be fantastic if people didn't have to take up arms to fight for their survival. But that is the world that's been created by colonialism. So, and then to go on top of that, it's like to put oppressed people, to hold them to these standards that you absolutely don't hold imperialist powers to, where, okay, fine. Like there's some people who are willing to concede that, sure, I guess you have a right to self-defense and that might include guns, but you have to do it in the most perfect and like angelic way. While we can literally just or the other side can carpet bomb you and we'll just like slap them on the wrist and then equate what you do to them. It's absurd on its face. But yeah, then to go even deeper into it, the lies of October 7th that we've been force-fed and continue to be force-fed till now. I mean, just at Morehouse College in his speech that he gave, Joe Biden was saying, I don't know if you caught it. I hope you didn't, because it just trigger warning in terms of just having to see someone lie so many times. Biden was like, on October 7th, I saw photos of like Hamas tying Palestinian mothers up and watching them and dousing their kids in gasoline and then watching them watch their kids burned alive. Like, I haven't even heard that claim before.
The Morehouse speech?
I think it was either the Morehouse speech or a different speech. I think it was the Morehouse speech. Regardless, he did say that like a few days ago.
Oh my God.
No, he didn't. Like he hasn't seen photos of that because that never happened. That never happened.
It's just like he said, he saw pictures of the beheaded babies. You remember that?
Yes.
I mean, that was
exactly.
How is he doing that? How's the U.S. president just going on and, I mean, I want to say bold-faced lie, but like I guess they all do that. But
well, all that's to say, like I want to ask you about this in particular, though. I mean, yes, bold-faced lies, but you wrote this piece for Electronic Intifada. It's called "Palestine's Resistance Has Already Won in Gaza." And in it, you write, I'm going to quote you, "Because of them and the brave Palestinian resistance, the world will never be the same again. The Qassam brigades launched a battle for the liberation of our homeland. And in doing so, they are awakening and freeing us all." And it's basically saying the resistance already won. And I think it's important to look at it from that perspective, because they've literally had to commit a genocide to try to make us forget about October 7th. So from your perspective, how historic was October 7th and the ongoing, I mean, I would say powerfully fierce resistance to this genocide?
I mean, it's October 7th is a before and after moment of world history. The world before October 7th and the world after. I think that's how historic and momentum that day will be. And historians are going to go back and revisit this for a long time to come. In terms of the resistance, and again, I'm not a military analyst by any means, but I do read and listen to what they say. And there's tends to be consensus among military analysts that this was one of the most effective and spectacular military assaults. I can't remember how they put it, but basically a guerrilla military assault. And these are mostly just dispassionate military analysts who don't care one way or another.
Right.
So from that perspective, because it was an attack on military installations initially. That's what it was meant to be. And it was meant to take hostages in exchange for Palestinian hostages, which are constantly, as you know, languishing in Israeli gulags without charge or trial, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't, like I said earlier, we still don't know what really happened. And nobody is really allowing an investigation into that, principally Israel, because I think an actual investigation into what happened on October 7th will not be in their favor at all. But what's more astonishing is that the resistance has literally faced the greatest military powers in the world, ganged up on it in a tiny strip of land. that they have completely carpet bombed, where they're committing an extermination campaign and a Holocaust. And the resistance is still popping up, even in places where they say Hamas has been eliminated and it's so, quote unquote, clean. In the north, the resistance regroups and faces off with them. I think Hamas at one point came out because Israel kept saying, well, they use human shields, etc. And Hamas came on their Telegram channel and said, leave the populated areas, come face us in these open areas where you have expelled, ethnically cleansed people. So they're not actually fighting Hamas. And I mean, we all know this. We all know they went into Gaza to do what they've been saying for 20 years they want to do. I mean, this is, it's a little bit shocking that this is such a surprise to people, because Israeli politicians, academics, and military personnel for the past 20 years have been talking about taking Gaza, cleaning Gaza, and particularly since the discovery of natural gas offshore Gaza's coast. And so they're doing what they've been wanting to do, which is to ethnically cleanse, to destroy Gaza, to take it, but they're failing. They're failing miserably. Their soldiers are being pummeled. The only thing Israel has succeeded in doing is killing children, killing civilians, and destroying homes, destroying the infrastructure of life for millions of people. They have not succeeded in returning their hostages, even though that's not really a real goal of theirs. If they wanted the hostages, they could have had them from the second day. They have not eliminated Hamas, nor can they. I mean, everybody knows they cannot get rid of Hamas. They tried to do this with the PLO, if you recall, in the 70s and 80s, until they realized they're never going to get rid of the PLO, and they need to approach them diplomatically and politically. And at some point, they're going to have to come to that realization with Hamas as well, because Hamas isn't going anywhere. They're here to stay, very clearly. So nothing is going to be the same, and not just for us, for the whole world, because I think, for decades, the masses have been reeling from this exploitive, imperial, largely Zionist, hyper wealthy ruling elite that has been destroying lives everywhere, even in Western countries. And Gaza is kind of is that moment of truth for a lot of people, and who are like, okay, enough is enough. We have endured so much, and now you want us to sit back and watch a live stream genocide and not do anything. We're not going to do that. And so I think it's stirring people's conscience, and not just for Gaza, but for oppression all over the world, and in various different ways.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote this piece, you've written so many amazing pieces. You wrote a piece actually on October 12th, so just a few days after the October 7th prison break. It's titled "Israel's on its colonial deathbed," which maybe could probably, in a way, be expanded to the broader imperial U.S.-led project in the world, at least at the beginning of its deathbed, in a way, at least in my opinion. But I want to ask you about some of what you saw on the ground in Gaza. But before we get into that, because I think oftentimes that's talked about sort of isolated and separate from what we just mentioned about, Palestinian resistance winning despite all of this horror, destruction, and terror from the Israelis. I think it's also really important to emphasize, like you said, Israel is on its colonial deathbed. So with that in mind, Has Israel lost, do you think? Or is at least at the beginning of losing?
I think that Israel is anachronistic in a lot of ways. It is it exists in the wrong time. There was a time when colonies were in vogue and it was fine, and racism was the order of the day, and how it's supposed to be, right? There was a time in human history where um, the world looked favorably upon enslavement of other humans, where it looked favorably upon inflicting famine and Bengal so that Brits could eat, and you know what I mean, and this was just simply the way the world was, and Israel belongs in that era because that's what it fits into. It fits into this sort of old colonial world um, that humanity has outgrown and rejected and repudiated. And so here, we're faced with, and the only reason I think Israel has managed this far is because of their success in exploiting the European Holocaust and European anti Semitism. That has been a hugely effective narrative and sort of bludgeon that they've used on people, as well as, a very clever sort of control of key aspects in society, whether it's, ownership of large swaths of media or the establishment of powerful lobbies. Um, so those are the things that I think have allowed Israel to continue to exist despite its anachronistic, racist nature. Everything Israel is something that humanity has largely rejected, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that some people, by virtue of some inherent right, are a better kind of human, right? Whether people feel that way in private or not, it is large that this is a concept that humanity has rejected on its this is our common sort of understanding as human beings that no, that's not okay. Yeah. Right, even if people practice something different, and that's what Israel is. And so it's just not a sustainable model, this idea that you can in 2024 continue to ethnically cleanse and bludgeon and brutalize indigenous people in the way that Western countries did hundreds of years ago is not sustainable in a quote unquote post-colonial world. We do live in a time of post-colonial studies, an understanding of intersectionality, uh, robust conversations about decolonization. These are all things, these are all sort of social and academic concepts that have been introduced into sort of public discourse just in the past decades, right? I mean, Edward Said is largely credited with this whole field, and so it's not unusual that we see this whole student movement being at the forefront of of public resistance all over the world. And so again, it's just any way you look at it, Israel is not a sustainable model in this day and age. And coupled to the fact that we are a resilient people, and we have never we've never stopped fighting for our homeland, and this is something like colonizers always underestimate the agency and of indigenous people and their attachment to the land and their willingness to fight and sacrifice for it. And it so happens that this anachronistic country um, uh, is fighting a people in an era of social media and instant information.
So I wanted to move this to some of what you saw on the ground. And I have a few sort of questions around that. But first, I know you've talked about this a lot, but you have been to Gaza more than once at this point. I think you came back, you went again after after I think you were there a couple months ago, and then you were there again a couple weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and so obviously it's a complete horror show. We're all watching these live streamed images that are just unbearable to look at, but they're on a screen. So obviously being on the ground is much more raw and much different and much more real, and probably worse than anybody can describe in words or see on their phone screen on Instagram. So if there's anybody who is qualified to use their words to describe it and paint a picture for us, it would be you. So can you just give us an idea of this time around? Because we had you on the show on Breakthrough News on our live stream the first time you went. You went a second time. Has anything changed? Was it worse? Was it the same? Your just general view, what comes to mind when you think about what you witnessed this time around?
So the second time I was there, I had a little bit more freedom to move, and I did go to other places and was able to see more of the destruction, um, which made it feel a lot worse than the first time. Um, the second time there was during a period of more supplies getting in, although the supplies remain wholly inadequate. But there was a little bit more, like flour was a little bit more available and it became cheaper. Um, these are just like sort of technical kind of observations, but the thing that made it feel so much worse is this sort of exhausting capacity of people to endure. Like, people are too tired. People are depressed. Like, it's the ability of people to withstand this horror is just dwindled, and the amount of trauma, the amount of anguish and pain and bewilderment and confusion, um, and just brokenness and physical harm and mental and emotional and psychological um, is staggering. And I sometimes am uncomfortable with the narratives about Samud and this sort of romantic picture that people like to paint of Palestinians, of withstanding and being steadfast, etc. The truth is that, I find this in some ways to be dehumanizing to Palestinians, because it's kind of, it's the left's answer to the right, which says that Palestinians are terrorists. And then you have folks on the left who say, sort of romanticize us. And again, it's this angelic victim narrative, right? Like that we can, and the truth is people can't take this. Nobody should have to endure this. Palestinians are not superhuman. I don't like that narrative. There's nothing about us that's superhuman. We are quite human, we're quite vulnerable, we're quite fallible, we're not perfect, and that, I want to emphasize that this is a population that's teetering on the abyss at this moment. And yes, they are, I think in some ways what we see in Gaza is the power of Islam in some ways um, to help people withstand what's going on. And I think that's really the true, secret sauce, if you will, because Muslims in Gaza in particular have deep faith that, you know, this what happens is God's will, and it is there up to them to find ways to make peace with their fate. Um, and I think that's one of the things still holding people together. But I do think um, once once this is over, the level of trauma that people have experienced is going to be a lot more apparent. People are kind of numb right now. They're just trying to survive. The state of children is something. I mean, you have kids who just want to die. Like I spoke to very small kids, and they said, "I want to die." Uh, and it's not just isolated, a few here and there. I heard it a lot. Yeah, it's.
I this thought crossed my mind quite often, actually, in the last few months. Because what you're talking about, what you saw in person, is something that you can notice in videos that you see of people losing family members now. There's an exhaustion on their face. I mean, this has been 7, almost 8 months of nonstop genocide. It's been people like living a sort of apocalyptic Hunger Games where they have to constantly search for food and water and shelter. And they've already lost family members. They've already had so much loss. They've been dodging bombs. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, like I was so sad for all the people who were killed in October, November, December. But now I'm just like, man, if you had to choose whether to be, I mean, this is a horrible thing to think and say, but if I had to choose between being killed in November or enduring 7 months of terror and then being killed in the same way, it's almost like the ones who are killed sooner were luckier. Because the last 7, I mean, it's just insane to watch. It's insane to look at. It's the level of loss, like you're just tortured to death until you're killed and murdered. It's just utterly shocking. And I think you make a really good point about resilience, because yes, of course, like human beings in general are quite resilient. And of course, Palestinians have demonstrated a certain level of resiliency, but also they're not superhuman. And we're looking at the complete and utter devastation of a whole society. And, you can go look at what happened to people who survived the Holocaust to see what's in store for people after this. It's like a trauma they will live with for the rest of their lives, and some of them will never recover from it. I just can't even. Yeah, I don't know. Those are just general thoughts. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that comes to mind quite often for me.
Yeah, I mean, people are always looking for analogies and precedents, and it's just there's really nothing, at least in modern history, that we can compare it to. For example, folks talk about this being like the Nakba, and in some ways, yeah, it is. Like we're seeing what our ancestors, what my parents, what my grandparents went through, and what made them leave. But at the same time, during the Nakba, there was horror and terror. But once people fled, once they made it to Syria or to Jordan or to Lebanon, they could find some measure of safety, some aid, something, right? What's happening in Gaza is this unrelenting, heightened state of alert in people's bodies. Like their cortisol levels are constantly high and never have a chance to come down. And I don't know what this does to, it ravages your mind, especially for developing brains. It alters the anatomy, of neural pathways in children when they live in this constant state of fear and heightened cortisol levels. So yeah, this is going to be felt for generations to come. And also, like, people focus on in terms of the death toll. I think it's way, way higher than what's being reported. Not only because there's still people missing, and not only because there's a lot of flaws and gaps in the accounting of number of dead, because some people are just burying their dead and not, taking them to a hospital where they're recorded. There's also destruction of records and things like that. But because a lot of people are also dying from preventable things like, lack of insulin for diabetics, those people aren't being counted among the martyrs, but there's a lot of people dying from, infections, from diabetes, from high blood pressure because they don't have antihypertensives, from heart disease because they don't have the medications that they need, and dialysis patients dying, cancer patients dying for lack of medical care. So there's this whole population of patients who are dying because of Israeli policies that aren't being counted among the martyrs. So the existing number is way higher, and the number of people who are going to continue to die because of this afterward, because of diseases they contracted and during the filth that they were forced to live in. Yeah, I think when all is said and done, I think we will learn that Israel destroyed at least 10% of the population in Gaza.
I mean, I think already 5% has been either killed or injured, and that's the undercount that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm also curious your thoughts on. I mean, I don't know if you've seen these kinds of pieces. I have, and it's absolutely infuriating, especially when an Israeli writes one. It'll be like, I spoke to someone in Gaza and they hate Hamas. I'm not denying there's people who don't like Hamas. It's a political party, and even people who support resistance might not like Hamas as a political party. And I also don't think that it's the best way to gauge opinion when people are undergoing a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious about your general thoughts on the whole like white person / Israeli writing that sort of article. And then B, the fact that Israel does this thing where it makes the population so desperate and then offers survival perks to anybody willing to like collaborate. Which absolutely happens. It happens in any place that's suffering. It happens in Lebanon too. We've got lots of collaborators in Lebanon. Some actually collaborate willingly without survival perks. But anyways, all that's to say, in all seriousness, I'm just curious your general thoughts on those 2 points.
So I have a very good sense of how people feel about Hamas in Gaza. But that's because I had a lot of conversations with folks. However, these are not conversations that I will have. These are internal conversations for Palestinians to have. It's nobody else's business. It's certainly not Westerners' business. It's not Israel's business. What we, our, none of us like the Palestinian Authority either. And these are internal matters that we'll sort out. But it's nobody. It's like saying, Hitler saying, well, people in this concentration camp don't like the,
That's actually a really apt analogy.
Yeah, it's just it's absurd. Whether we like Hamas or not, whether anybody likes Hamas or not, Palestinians are undergoing a genocide. Period. That's the discussion point for Israelis and for the rest of the world to have. What we think of our leadership, who we elect, what I don't know, whatever. That's nobody's business.
Well said. You don't think it's Anthony Blinken's place? Is that what you're trying to tell me? You don't think it's Anthony Blinken's place to decide who gets to represent Palestinians? No, I absolutely agree. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's like, Palestinians having a say in who Americans get to elect as their presidents. It's just, the arrogance of these people saying, oh well, Hamas will not rule here, and we're going to build a pier in somebody else's like sovereign territory. Like it's schoolyard bullying on an international scale.
Yeah.
And this Absolutely. And I think they're so out of touch, Anya. They don't understand how naked they are. They don't understand that we see them and that the normal order of propaganda and BS that they feed the world isn't working this time.
Yeah, I think this is like on a global scale happening, which is something that you've touched on in your pieces, specifically in the sense of like, you were talking this about a before and after October 7th situation. And you've also put this in the context of like global North versus global South in terms of how everyone sees the world and how, in terms of the narratives we're seeing, even I'm going to quote you in one piece that you wrote. You said these brave Palestinian fighters overtook Israeli colonies built on their ancestral villages, seeing their stolen lands for the first time in their lives, even though they're less than a few miles away. For 75 years, Israel has killed, maimed, robbed, brutalized, humiliated, dispossessed, harassed, and terrorized indigenous Palestinians with utter impunity. Decades of graphic photos and videos attesting to Israel's wholesale barbarity against a principally unarmed indigenous civilian population failed to elicit even an iota of the outrage and headlines now aimed at Palestinians for daring to fight back. Israel and its Western allies claimed shock and surprise and vowed retaliation, with analysts pondering such an egregious failure of their intelligence apparatus, one of the most sophisticated in the world. Such are the disparate narratives between East and West, between the global South and global North, and the truth is likely far more sinister and cynical. So I like that you put that in the context of the way the world sees this. So let's talk about that. How has this, do you think, brought that difference, I guess, is a polite way to put it, between global North and global South? How has the genocide in Gaza just brought that to the fore?
So I think, Israel is kind of the linchpin in Western hegemony. It's sort of this, like I said, this old world colonial project, still sort of trying to play out in a modern world. And it's failing. And I think they know it's failing, but they can't let it go because it's kind of, like I said, it's the linchpin. If Israel is defeated, and they actually already are, but if there's kind of a formal defeat for Israel, it's a humiliation and for Western hegemony that hinges on Israel's survival in a resource-rich region. And Israel has acted for so long as like the henchman for the West. Like, a lot of the coups and the arming of militias that happen in Africa, including M23 and particularly to extract minerals from Congo, but also from Guinea-Bissau, Benin, Togo, and all of these nations in Africa with a lot of resources. Israel is always there. Their like going back even to the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and the installation of Mobutu Sese Seko, Israel was protected Israel protected Mobutu Sese Seko.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh yeah. He had this whole paratrooper regiment that was all Israelis, and so I'm sure you've heard of Dan Gertler, for example. So Dan Gertler is this Israeli businessman who he's like King Leopold's replacement in Congo. Literally, he somehow he owns all like vast land swaths of land in Congo, and has basically been enslaving Congolese in these various mines, particularly diamond mines, but also cobalt mines. I did this whole talk and this whole research, by the way, if you're ever interested in watching it. But one of the things they did what is that, you know, they have all these connections to the Israeli military, and so they're able, so they bring in all of these military commanders who are, you know, retired, because Israel forces them to retire at the age of 40, right? So you have all of these career military men with no jobs, no skills except killing, and so there's a lot of labor, killing labor, I guess, coming from Israel.
This is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews.